Great, great. Well, I'm so glad to be here. My name is Lakeisha Poole, and I'm here to present about salary negotiations because I know that salary negotiations can be one of the most anxiety-producing parts of the job search and looking for an offer and figuring out what you want. So I'm going to go and share my screen here so I can open up my presentation. So, what I want from everybody is to be a salary negotiation superstar. And what that means in my mind is somebody who is both confident, empowered, authentic, kind, and calm through the process of looking and trying to negotiate for the best salary that works for both for their needs. So that's the main goal. You know, a little bit about me. So I founded an organization called Black Virtual Career Fair in 2019, and we host regular virtual career fairs focused on Black professionals. Although all are welcome, so if you do want to participate, you can learn about our fairs on virtual.blackbcf.com. In addition to hosting fairs, and we host 5 fairs a year. I've been an employment attorney since 2006. I've also have some insight on salaries and benefits and whatnot from the lens of an employment lawyer as well. So in terms, oh, wait, let go the other way. Let's see here. Sorry. Here we go. Yes. Okay. So the agenda today is to go first through the overview of salary negotiations at the pre-offer and post-offer stage. So I'm not going to talk about the process of if you're already in a position and navigating like a bump up in your salary. I'm going to talk about some strategies and steps that you can use to be better positioned to be confident in the process. And then hopefully we'll have time to do question and answers, because I think that a lot of this stuff is very specific to who you are, what you want, and then the particular scenarios of the people and the type of job that you're looking for. So common myths about salary negotiation, and these are typically myths that I think that women in particular, um, at least, in terms of the data that we see, a lot of women are not negotiating as much as their male counterparts. And see, yeah, and so some of those, three myths are, which I'll pick apart in my presentation is one, if you have a good offer, you shouldn't negotiate. If it's, if it's all good, you don't have to negotiate. And I want to talk about that. And, also the fear is that if you do negotiate, that you'll be perceived as pushy. I think it's all about your approach and how you go about the salary negotiation. And then also this myth that people have is that you should ask for exactly how much you want. So let's go here. So why should you negotiate? It's not that you have to negotiate in every circumstance. I mean, there are situations like in this situation where there's a company that gives you a very specific, we pay everybody in lockstep. That is a reason to consider what to negotiate and what not. But the reason to negotiate in general is just because there's no way for a company, or there's no reason for a company to pay you more unless you ask. And when I say pay, it's not necessarily just about base salary. It could be in terms of benefits as well, or other things of value to you. I think it makes sense to negotiate for the things that you want. And another issue is if you don't negotiate and you're in a situation where everyone else is negotiating, you can be in a situation where you're the only person, or there's a class of people that are not making as much as another class. And so, keeping that in mind is important, because, a lot of people have this fear that like, oh, I should be grateful for the offer and I shouldn't ask for anything beyond the offer because, just out of fear that they could lose the offer. And again, I think that that's a matter of how you do it, what your approach is. So, it is okay to negotiate. I think that that's the most important thing to understand. It is expected that you will negotiate. I think that even companies that are doing stuff to make things, very transparent, I think that it's still an expectation. And if they, stand on their position, they'd still wouldn't necessarily be offended that you'd ask for more. So don't feel like asking for anything in terms of negotiating is wrong, because it is what is expected, and a lot of times a lot of companies will offer you less than what is in their budget. So knowing that is important to kind of give your initial confidence of why you should do so. And I think that it's also a can the ability to negotiate and knowing your value makes you a stronger candidate. So it is part of the energy that you bring into the organization that establishes yourself as competent and capable. And I think it's especially appreciated when you can do so while maintaining cooperation and a spirit of authenticity throughout the process. And money is only part of the equation. So, again, you have to look at everything, in terms of benefits, but it is something that is part of the entire equation, both for the company and for you as a candidate. So I think that those are, it's important to keep that in mind when you're considering just like the initial send off on, should I negotiate? So I think the first thing that you should do before you even get into a conversation, and you should also have all of this done at the initial interview stage, because as I will kind of talk about, in terms of where these conversations start, they often happen in the process of interviewing, where you're going to be asked questions and you're going to need to know how to navigate that successfully. So the most important thing is to build your confidence with both external and internal research. So the external is the market research that you should do beforehand, which I'll show some sites that you can use. And then the internal research is that self-reflection that is about really getting clear on what your numbers are and having the confidence to just understand that and be very matter of fact about that in terms of like what you're willing to accept and what you're willing to negotiate. So, step one in terms of external resource, internal, or I'm sorry, external research is, search salaries and create a broad salary range for the desired roles within the organization. You can also consider asking in career focused Facebook groups. I know that those have been really helpful. You can, any kind of platform that shares salaries, that's what you should do. And you should look for, the different, the different roles, and then see what the broad range is. And I say broad because again, you have to factor in the size of the organization and what the total overall package is. But you want to have a broad salary range so that when you're asked the inevitable, what are your salary expectations, you're going to be able to basically report back what the range is that you've determined from your research, as opposed to saying, I must have this, that kind of thing. I think it's always better to give a range if you have to give a range. And the range should be as broad as possible, because again, you don't want to have a range that is not going to include an amount that you would accept or would be one of your wish numbers. You want it to be as broad so that you can try, you're targeting to get a number that you're going to be extremely happy with, and minimum a number that you would have and you would consider as fair. So I think that that's important to have a broad range. So, in terms of the internal work, and this is personal, but figure out within yourself what your want and walk number are. So, what are those three numbers? The wish figure is that number that you would absolutely love to be paid. If you got it, you'd be like, yay, life that's great. It's more than, maybe it's over market. That would be your figure. Your want figure is what you see as a fair amount of money to be paid, one that you would be excited to work for. You think it's completely fair. It's within the broad range. So I guess wish would be probably the upper tier of the band. And then the walk figure is where you draw the line in the sand. And the reason why you want to do this is because this will build your confidence when you hear numbers. You don't want to come into a situation where you hear a number and you have not considered these things ahead of time. And when that happens, you can tend to act more emotionally than to act more rationally about the situation. So getting these numbers, both your internal within yourself, like where are you, drawing your numbers, what's important to you given all of the benefits and, in terms of the numbers, and then what is the market telling you in terms of desirability. Though that's what you would want to get clarification on before you come into the negotiations. And certainly before you have these conversations where you're going to be asked certain questions at the pre-offer stage. So what I mean about the pre-offer stage is oftentimes, you're going to be asked by a recruiter about your salary expectations. And, technically it's illegal to ask some of these questions, but it's only in some jurisdictions. I mean, they usually what they'll do is they'll ask your salary expectations, which isn't illegal. But if they ask you, something about, what your current salary is, for example, try to avoid not to answer that question, especially if you're moving to a different position or role, or if this is a step up from what you already have. I think that, what you would do to answer that question is say, hey, my salary expectations are this. So instead of saying what your current salary is, just say, my understanding is of this role, here is the range. That I understand and expect, I expect the salary to be within this range. Try not to go first. I mean, that just should go without saying that, if you're in the interview stage, the focus is on, selling yourself to the organization in terms of talking about what you bring to the table, answering questions, and you don't want to necessarily start to talk about salary unless they're actually bringing it up. And I think another thing is, if you are concerned that this place might have, numbers that are definitely a no-go. I mean, obviously look at the job description. If there is a salary broad range publicized, that's really helpful to come in, because then, you can save yourself the trouble of, I wasted time looking at this offer, and I know that they at least from their publication, that they're not going higher than a range that is, under my walk range. And then the other thing is, don't give them a small range. Like, don't give them a range that's with a low that's under your walk range. And I mean, I guess, it's possible you could say that you might find something under your walk range, but I wouldn't give them that as your salary expectations, because you definitely want to get to a point where you're getting closer to, between wish and want would be ideal in terms of where you land. So you don't want it to be so high that it's completely out of what people are paid for that position, but you don't want it to be so low that you're not going to be happy with the offer. And this is also about understanding that, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're really clear, like you're with your walk range, that, hey, I cannot go under this, it'll give you the confidence to stay in that position, especially if it's a lower offer than you expected. So how to navigate questions about salary expectations pre-offer. Here's some suggestions. So if you're pressed, I think you should give a broad range, as I said before, based on what you found in your research. Another option, if you don't want to give them a range, you can turn the tables. And this depends on the person, but a lot of times, if you come into the interview in a kind of an inquisitive, open, authentic way, you can say, hey, I've seen a different ranges on the market. What would you recommend? I mean, that actually puts it on them to say, hey, what do you think? You could do one of the two. It really depends on what your style is and what you think would be most appropriate for that situation. It can depend also on the organization, right? Because I think that a lot of times, you get a range, but there's a huge variation between the size of the organization, what someone is going to get paid. So that's another reason why you can basically hedge that question and do it from a sincere place. Like, I have looked at these ranges, and it's kind of about what the ranges are and what you don't, basically what you don't want to do is be in a situation where you lock yourself in and they're going to offer you an amount based on what you said during the pre-offer stage. So what I'm trying to get at is just trying to avoid putting yourself into a situation where you're just committing to too small of a range. For example, like if you were to have, the top of the range was, let's say it was 85,000, and then they offered 85,000. At that point, it would be kind of considered in bad faith to ask for more. So you don't want to get into a position where, you're doing yourself a disservice by what you're disclosing during the pre-offer stage. So confidence is key. It's easier said than done. I think that I wrote a little bit about this, but I think that what's important, I think from the last presentation, this idea of having deep breaths, getting in touch with yourself and having a better idea of what you do when you're nervous is actually very, insightful. Like, for example, when I get nervous, sometimes I'll talk really fast and, I get like anxious. That's something that you would want to try to, get in check with when you're in the interview process. Whether it means just slowing down deliberately, that's important in terms of conveying the confidence that you'd like. So, even if it is your dream job and you want to be sincere about your enthusiasm for the job, you don't want to get it into a situation where you kind of suggest, hey, I don't have anything else going on. And that can happen when, you're in several interviews and, you might pass along information that suggests that you don't have anything else lined up. So, it's not about lying or saying, hey, I've got all this, it's not about, pumping it up, but you definitely want to just, have an even kill about the situation. And another one way you can do this from an authentic place is to aggressively look for as many opportunities as possible. So you're never committing to that place where you really are going to take it personally if they offer you something that you're not looking for. So, being cooperative during the interview process, being authentic about what you think is a reasonable band, which, again, includes what you've done through research, and just being confident and looking into yourself in terms of how to be, what you do when you're nervous, how can you convey that, that you're sure about what you have to offer and that you're highly valuable. These are things that you can do. And I think another reason, or another thing that can help with the confidence is, really doing that in, the research ahead of time. So again, when you have those numbers in your head, you've done the research, you can be a lot more logical and detached from, you can be detached from what they say or what happens. You're not necessarily getting, really as affected from that. So Jedi mind tricks. So squashing your fear. I talked a little bit about that in terms of doing deep breaths and getting this information. I think another thing when it comes to negotiation is to be comfortable with silence. I actually think that, you don't want to go in, even though I am an employment lawyer, you don't want to go in, pleading your case. In fact, I think the less you say, the better. Why? Because people will infer from your silence more than what you can convey by being in it, like very agitated and having it amplified. Of course, it's all important within context, like what they say and everything. But I think it is a skill in negotiation to be comfortable with silence and also to have a measured response to the proposal. So not necessarily saying, again, not building your case, not bringing your dissertation and, whiteboard with outlines of your value like that. That's usually not a good idea. So another thing that's helpful is to say the number back to them and to mirror body language. So these are ways in which you're building, a cooperative negotiating environment within the negotiation. This is assuming you're in person. And I'll talk about how you can do this by email as well, like what words you can say and how to do this. So yeah. So counter offer. So let's say you got an offer and it's less than you wanted. It's within your walk number. Well, I think the first don't is, don't rely on your emotions to fuel your responses. And, it's really important not to come off as, put off by the offer, aggressive or demanding, and also I would say that you don't want to necessarily negotiate just for the sake of it. I think that, again, I said at the beginning that most of the time the issue is women not negotiating when they should. But if you have a case where, there is a company that has stated all of the benefits and how they've come to their their compensation, I'm not suggesting that, hey, if you have your wish number, you should negotiate anyway because, that's empowered. Like, you need to be authentic to what makes sense for you in the circumstances. Again, with the idea that, hey, it usually doesn't hurt to ask if you have an understanding that, it's within a range. And that's why we, again, back to the market research. So, in terms of suggestions, how can you do this? Well, again, I think less is more. Less is more. I think you should definitely just ask in a very straightforward way. And, you can also, again, if you're looking at other opportunities, say, this is what I'm being considered for at other organizations. I think that it's not necessarily pushy to say, hey, I'm being considered for this amount at other organizations, and leaving it to them to say, hey, again, if you leave a silence, they will either decide we got to come back and propose another number. Um, Another thing you can do is, again, ask for about benefits as well. So, so suggestions in terms of counter offers is, again, instead of making it, I'm great and blah blah, like, again, no dissertation, is like, hey, do you have any flexibility on the salary? I had something closer to this in mind, or can you go up to this? It depends on how much of a divide you have. That those are ways in which you can make a suggestion for a counter offer and then let it go. Like, let the silence, let them come back and see what they say. um, and so basically that's my overview of what the important matters are in terms of counter offers and how to navigate the pre-question offers. I wanted to do this presentation where I went through the overview and then there'd be questions, and hopefully we can go through what issues you have and go through maybe some case scenarios. So thank you. Let me see if I can. Let's see here. Oh,
I can pop back in, but I'm not needed because there's a whole bunch of questions that came in.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so feel free to answer. I can pop off, but if you want me back in, you just holler for me.
Do I go to comments?
Oh, can you see them? Oh, I
Oh,
can.
yes.
Yeah,
Yay.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
I want to do
I'm
this
sorry.
thing.
Bear with me as I'm learning Hopin for the
Let
first
me
time,
tell you,
everyone.
Lakeisha, this has been a day. I'm
Yes.
going to have some wine tonight.
Oh,
So,
yes.
because it's been a whole thing. But I'm going to put myself off of the screen while you answer these lovely questions.
Okay, great, great. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so if a salary is posted and it's lower than I want, is it still worth talking to the organization, or is it a waste of my time and theirs? So if they have a set salary and there's no range at all, I would probably still talk, because usually there's a range. If it's way lower, then I would definitely reconsider. If you really are like, that's my walk number, I wouldn't necessarily continue with that if it was the case. But if it's within the range and there's a range that is within the lower bracket, I would still pursue it. Why? Because a lot of times, again, if you do this well and you present well in terms of how you present your value, there's a lot of times the recruiters and people will go to bat for you and ask for more. They can go and get more budget. So if it was completely like their numbers are absolutely walk number, I wouldn't. But if it was within the range, and there was at least something that you would consider, I would probably go for that, personally. Some companies, sorry, how do we put this? Okay, there we go. Yay. I'm still getting that. Some companies put us at a disadvantage because they put a question with a required answer during the application process. I know. Some don't offer range, but put us a specific number we want. I'd be evasive, honestly. If they put a specific number, I would say within the range. I would still answer it like that. And if they have an issue with that, I don't know. I would consider an organization that said, "Hey, give me the specific number that you want." Um, or I would put them a higher number. I'd put a higher number. I'd put my wish number. Um, but I think again, most of the time they're trying to get to what your range is, and within their. I mean, again, if you have the insight on what they're already looking for, and you've considered your wish, want, and walk number within that range, I think it should be fine to have that range within the application. Um, yeah. So just on that. Or the ranges are narrow. So I would, again, if they're asking for your ranges, I would make the ranges broader. If their range is very narrow, again, just because they have a range doesn't mean that they can't go and ask for more budget. But again, I would also qualify that with understanding that if you really are not like the range is way too low, the job role is too low, then I would consider looking at another opportunity if it's just, wow, there's no way. What I would do in that case is, again, you want to wait until you're in. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna see if I can. I'm trying to make it so I can click this. It's frozen. It's okay, but that's all right. I'm answering Lauren's question, and that was, or the ranges are narrow. Oh, there we go. Yay. Okay, cool. Um, yeah, okay, the application's online. I'm left with no option but to supply a number. Okay, so they're asking for a specific number. Um, I think worst case scenario, I would do at the higher end, or I would do a median or an average of the range that you determined. But again, I think that that's really, it's challenging. Some people will just not answer it and they'll put zero, it just to get past the application. Um, it depends on the role. I mean, I think that, where if the company has provided a range, I would probably be comfortable putting on the upper range, if you have to. Um, but yeah, that's a challenging one. Again, they can't. They're not supposed. I mean, they should ask for range. They shouldn't necessarily say what exactly do you want. Just because I feel like it shouldn't preclude your ability to offer and to do a counter offer. Um, so so yeah. Okay, you have a wish number there. Okay, sorry. I'm going through the here. Let's see. Yeah, so this was helpful. Sorry, I'm like, thank you. With some companies forcing you to supply a number during the application process, is that a way for them to weed a person out? It can be, but again, I think that, the application is also along with the resume. I mean, ideally, you want to be in a situation where you can talk to recruiters. I think that is one advantage of doing the virtual fair. I will say a little pitch, but is that you can actually talk to people and give their resume, and you're not doing the application necessarily. So you can actually do the initial conversation before you're talking about filling out the application. Um, it can be a way to weed people out. I think that if your numbers are way out of what they can feasibly pay, that's one thing. You just wouldn't want to be in the position. I wouldn't necessarily take somebody's what they say in the application as an indicator that you can't negotiate later. I would, if you can put a number, I would put a number that's on the higher end. Um, or within the higher end of the range that they've already specified. And again, during the interview process, that's a reason to explain, because you don't want to lowball yourself. And again, this is where I understand that this is one of the challenging parts of this process, is where you want to be desired, you want to get a chance to talk to them, and yet you don't want to um, undermine your desire to negotiate. So Outside of pay, what other benefits do you negotiate? Oh, so equity for sure. It depends on a moving location. There's a number of benefits you can ask for. It really depends on what you're looking for, as in terms of like and things to consider about the work environment, like the value that it has to you. This is actually part of the internal assessment. I mean, what are their benefits package, how much they're offering in terms of equity is a huge thing, as was discussed before. There is this difference between men and women in terms of the amount of equity and how much how much the vesting schedule. What else can you negotiate? Yeah, relocation fees, bonuses, um, sign-on bonuses. It depends on the role, if there's any kind of commissions. Um, yeah, I think those are the big ones. So yeah, so I think that those are ways that you can get around if you're not on the same point, and that's kind of why it's hard to answer the question about what do you want for salary, because an organization can have so many benefits that are effectively worth more than the other organization that technically pays more in terms of base compensation. And that's what you should also figure out and look at in making a decision on what to offer, or to what to counter offer. What's an acceptable range? For example, there's a big difference between 80,000 and 120,000. How much can that change between the interview and offer stage? I'd say, yeah. I mean, I think that that's a broad range, and I would go for a broad range like that. It's not about what can change; it's what they first propose you. Like, what is their offer to you after you've received an offer. If they give you a range and it's in between the middle, I would definitely ask for more. And it depends on where they're at. Are they at the lower end, at the higher end? I mean, if they gave you 120, I would still ask for more, but that's just me. It depends. Again, it depends on the circumstances, what you bring to the table. But I wouldn't necessarily ask for 140. I would say, hey, can you go up this? I think that's an approach that you can take to get that. But yeah, that is a divide. That's exactly what I mean in terms of having a broad number at the pre-offer stage before you have gotten the offer. And so again, what you do once the offer is given is really where you have to decide, okay, well, what do I want to ask for? And that should be, something that is an assessment of all of the benefits that you have, what you're, how interested you are in that position. I mean, do you really want that position, and the benefits that are kind of come from that opportunity versus what you have in other opportunities. And then from there you can say, hey, I want to get higher to this range, higher to the upper end of this range, so I'm going to ask for yeah, I would ask for the upper tier, and then the compromise would be something maybe in between. Like, let's say they offered you 85,000 and you want closer to 120. I'd ask for 115 and see where they come in terms of that. I'm giving an example, but just so you have an idea of where you can go. Like, can you go up? I was expecting more based on my market research of the position. And if they say no, you can say, oh, can we talk a little bit more about the benefits that you have here? And, can we kind of, talk, discuss that? Because sometimes it will come with, hey, we can't give you a base salary increase, but we can give you a bonus, or we can give you a relocation fee or something like that. So those are things, that's where you can have that conversation. How should I handle it when your range is higher than what the company can offer? That happened to me recently, and I had to backpedal and talk about how other benefits would close the gap. How do you handle it when your range is higher than what they can offer? So if it depends. If you were learning that for the first time at the interview, like, usually they have a range, and so you could kind of tweak what you ask for based on what they've already posted. If you didn't know any of this, because they don't post anything, then if you really want to take, I mean, that goes back to, you gave a range. You have to really think about um I mean, you can talk about how other benefits can close the gap if you're willing to take that lesser amount. But again, the point of it is, like I would still, regardless of the range, I would ask for. I would see if they could do better on the base salary, and if they absolutely can't, then you have to consider if it's worth walking, and then again you could talk about the other benefits. Um, the challenge is, the best position to be in when you're doing these negotiations is where you have um, other offers, and you also can confidently say, "Hey, I'm being offered this at this amount. Is there anything you can do about this salary?" And see if they take that into consideration. Um, and some companies really can't. A lot of times they can, um, but they need to get budget. They got to get cleared, and they have to figure out what to do in order to make what you want possible. I wouldn't necessarily start backpedaling and saying, "Oh, I'm willing to take lesser amount." Like you don't want to cave immediately. Just see what they can do and give it some silence before you say, "Oh, I'm willing to take it or not." You know what I mean? If they're like, "Take it or leave it," that's it. Then you have to make that decision. But I wouldn't necessarily try to justify why you asked for a higher amount, if that makes sense. How much is the supply within company promotions? So this does not apply as much because I'm kind of thinking about this in terms of the context of somebody who is going from the pre-offer to post-offer stage. You certainly should negotiate when you're at a company. How I say I would approach this, I would still do the research and get a better idea. I would probably look internally too. I mean, if you're already in the organization, it depends on how well you know people, but I would try to get insight on what salaries and information and what benefits are on offer. And how I would present if you're presented with a number is, hey, would you consider going up to this amount, and just propose a different number, and then again let it sit, see what they say. And a lot of times they'll go, "Oh, we have to go back to this person or that person." They might have to figure out if they can go up an additional amount. So continuing the forced number question, AngelList, for example, requires you to enter amount, not range, for recruiters to see your resume. So that's for recruiters to see your amount. So are you saying that it's a forced number of like what salary you want to be paid? Yeah, I would put my wish number for that. If you wanted to be more competitive, you could put it closer to the want, and then negotiate when you actually are in a position where you're talking to the companies, to make yourself, if you want to be in the position of being able to do a counter offer. So consider the context of AngelList. They're requiring you to do it, but that's not the companies per se. So the recruiters are not enforcing it. It's not the same exactly as, an application where, the company is using that directly to do the negotiations. It's like an entry point to see what's the starting point for salary. So I wouldn't necessarily keep that from negotiating and doing counter offers. Oh, sorry. Oh, let's see. Where am I? Oh, yeah. Okay. Continuing with the forced number question, AngelList. Oh, yeah. I talked about that one. Okay. I heard someone say that if they're asked a specific number on the application, it is required that they put 0 and to indicate. Yeah, I think that can be good advice. I think that again, you can put a range. If you have to put a number, it doesn't even let you put a range. I would just put a number that's on the higher end and then discuss that. Yeah. And B. Morgan, oh, that's a good point. So B. Morgan mentioned some other benefits: education stipend, transportation, parking, also great benefits that make a big difference in the long-term, your salary profile to consider in your package, your total package. I just spoke with someone who negotiated for 20,000 higher then their offer and got it. I love hearing that. Bravo. That's great. And yeah, again, there are, a lot of times people, they do have budget to do more. Um, and so you just, you really have to understand, hey, again, when you understand your numbers, I think it's a good thing to be in a position where you can just ask for what you want it. And again, let's see what they say. Because it is really, I think it's a great thing to get, even if you don't get exactly what you want, to get something that is higher than what you were asked for. There is a feeling of, excitement and a lot of movement in terms of your, future income potential actually in making that negotiation. So this is why we're talking about this. This is why it's really important to kind of, consider that in terms of negotiating. Can you elaborate on negotiating stock options? So, again, there's, I mean, just to make it really simple, I mean, it's like, again, you can negotiate. It depends on the organization, the number of shares, the vesting schedule are ways in which you can negotiate. You can, negotiate a larger amount. Usually there's a 1-year cliff for X number of shares. So, I think that, again, I think what you can do is you can ask for just, again, a higher percentage, like more stock. And there are constrictions on how much they can allocate, and it would be helpful to know like what their process is in terms of stock allocations. So it's a little more nuanced than I can give in the few minutes that we have left, but I can look and see if I can find some interesting resources on like the best ways to negotiate stock options, and what information would be useful. So where are we? What was that? So yeah, so I can look at a little bit like in terms of what questions would be useful. Because we're gonna have the ability to post, like I can share my slides after the event, correct? So I can add a few resources for stock. I know that like there's some sites that post that information. And B. Morgan says, folks, please talk about how much you make to your colleagues. Transparency. I agree. It can be challenging. Sometimes people are a little, can be cagey about that. But that, if you have an organization that is willing to do that, that can be really helpful. And I say that, from the perspective of like being an employment attorney and sometimes seeing the salaries, and then you're like, wow, there's a lot of disparities in the amounts. And sometimes, when we figure out what the amounts are, it's like, oh, it just seems like this whole class of folks are making, at least, many, thousands of dollars more than others. So I think that's, it is a good culture to have transparency. It's also great to have organizations that are transparent about their compensation packages and their programs, like how do they, create more fairness within their compensation structure. So I think that's a great sign of a good culture, is one where there is some transparency. So Jenny asks, and let me know if I'm okay for time, because I'm assuming we're going to stop in 5 minutes. So I'll answer a few more. So, okay. Any advice for negotiating for more paid time off and flexibility with work schedules? I've always been really passionate about my roles, but the last 2 years have encouraged me to prioritize myself and family. Oh, I totally agree with that. Yes, I think it is worth it to bring that up. I think that that's a question that you can ask, not even in the context of negotiating. It's just, what is your are you back in person? Is it a hybrid? What's the in person? I think it's worth it to see, how many days would be expected to be in the office. I think I would just ask about the flexibility and see, once you get the offer, negotiating for more paid time off and flexibility would be something I would include. And some organizations are going to be more willing to do that because they would rather do that than up your salary. So that's definitely something that I think it's worth to bring after the negotiation. I mean, I'm sorry, after the offer. specific to that. But during pre-offer, I would ask about, what is their current situation? Are they, what are, is this role going to be primarily remote? Is it a hybrid? Are you going to be in the office? What are the expectations in terms of, being in person? Ah, okay. Let me see. I got one more. All right. Oh, yeah. Any advice? Yay. Okay. Any advice? All right. Did I get the right one? Yeah. Okay. Any advice for negotiating sign-on bonuses? Any place we can look for what's a going rate by position? I would love that. If someone knows what the rate is for bonuses, by all means. I don't know that offhand. I can get stock information, but I'm not sure. I have no sense of what is reasonable for that, and I've heard very widely. Um, yeah, it's going to vary based on the organization. And it's also going to vary by the position. How desirable is the role? I don't know if there's anything that's publicly available. If someone knows anything that is like publicly available with respect to sign-on bonuses, that would be useful. But other than that, another thing I didn't actually mention as much in this presentation is if you know people within the organization, and you're friends with them, or you can even try reaching out and trying to get that information from people, that if you're, again, this is actually back to the reason why it's good to network is, in having these Facebook groups, where there's disclosure of, hey, this is what I was offered. And so people can then chime in and say, oh, that was a little light compared to what I got, that kind of thing. And then of course you have to qualify what the differences are based on the location and the role. But those are ways in which I think you can do so privately. I don't know if there's anything publicly available. I wish there was, but I think that again, the communication within groups is a good idea. So, and I don't know if just hopefully there's, other community, if there's any community where there's people talking about offers, is a good opportunity. So
I can hop on and get you off the hot seat, Lakeisha.
okay. This was fun. I feel like there's like endless questions, but
I know.
yeah,
It was incredible.
but that's great. I'm glad there were a lot of questions.